Let me start with something that doesn't sound dramatic but probably feels familiar. You sit down to do something important, not urgent, important. The kind of thing you know would make a real difference if it actually got done. You tell yourself you'll just ease into it, maybe check one thing first, and then another. And none of it feels wrong in the moment. It all feels responsible, necessary even. And yet, when you finally stop and look back, the day is gone. You weren't lazy. You weren't distracted in an obvious way. You were busy, engaged, active. But the one thing that truly mattered is still untouched, waiting for tomorrow that somehow keeps getting pushed further away. That experience isn't random, and it's not a personal failure. It's a pattern, a loop. And the reason it's so hard to break is because it feels productive while it's happening. This is where focus on what matters begins, not with motivation, not with discipline, and not with another system to manage your time, but with a much quieter and more dangerous question. How do we get so good at filling our days while still feeling stuck in the same place? The book doesn't accuse. It doesn't shame. It simply points out something most people never stop long enough to notice. That attention is being spent constantly, but rarely invested intentionally. Every single day, whether you realize it or not, you're making decisions about what deserves your energy. Not just big decisions, but tiny ones. What you respond to first, what you postpone, what you tolerate, what you allow to interrupt you. And here's the part that matters. Most of those decisions are made automatically. Not because they're important, but because they're available, because they're loud, because they're right in front of you. The book makes this point clearly. If you don't define what matters ahead of time, everything else will compete for that role, and most of it will sound convincing enough to win. Think about a normal workday, not a chaotic one, a normal one. You open your laptop with a general idea of what you want to accomplish. Then a message comes in, then a request, then a small problem that feels easier to solve than the larger thing you've been avoiding. None of these are bad. That's what makes them dangerous. They feel useful. They feel like progress. But hours later, you realize you've been working around the thing that actually mattered instead of on it. The book explains that this isn't a focus problem. It's a priority problem disguised as busyness. One of the strongest ideas in the book is that clarity doesn't come from doing more. It comes from deciding less. Most people think focus is about effort, about pushing harder, about forcing attention. But the book flips that idea completely. Focus is a side effect of knowing what deserves your attention in the first place. When everything feels important, nothing gets your full energy. When one thing is clearly defined as meaningful, everything else naturally falls into place around it. Not because you became more disciplined, but because you became more selective. Here, where the shift really happens. The book asks you to stop organizing your life around tasks and start organizing it around values. Tasks are endless. They regenerate. You clear one list and another appears. Values, on the other hand, act like a filter. When you're clear on what actually matters to you, your growth, your work, your relationships, your long-term goals, decisions become simpler. Not easier, but clearer. You stop asking, "Can I fit this in?" and start asking, "Does this deserve space in my life at all?" And this is where most people get stuck, because it requires something uncomfortable. Saying no without drama. No productivity hacks. No guilt. Just a quiet, firm decision that not everything needs your attention. The book emphasizes that subtraction is not loss, it's protection. Every boundary you set isn't limiting your life. It's defending the few things that actually move it forward. When you stop trying to keep up with everything, you finally have enough energy to show up fully for something. There's a powerful moment in the book where the idea of waiting for the right mood is challenged. Most people think they need to feel focused before they can work on what matters. The book argues the opposite. You don't wait for focus. You create it by choosing what matters first. Focus follows commitment, not motivation. Once a priority is clearly chosen, your mind stops negotiating. The noise doesn't disappear completely, but it loses its authority. It becomes background instead of direction. Over time, something interesting happens. The constant mental clutter starts to fade. Not because life gets simpler, but because your criteria gets stronger. You stop measuring your days by how full they were and start measuring them by whether they moved you closer to something meaningful. You realize that progress doesn't require perfect conditions. It requires protected attention. And protected attention only exists when you decide, ahead of time, what deserves it. The book doesn't promise a dramatic overnight transformation. What it offers is something far more realistic and far more powerful: control. Control over your energy, control over your direction, control over what you allow to shape your days. It reminds you that your time will be spent no matter what. The only real choice is whether it's spent intentionally or accidentally. So the question this book leaves you with isn't how to get more done. It's not how to stay busy. It's not how to keep up. The question is simpler and heavier. What is the small number of things that actually matter in your life right now, and what would change if you started protecting them like they mattered? Because once you answer that honestly, your days stop feeling scattered. They start feeling aligned. And that's when real progress, quiet, steady, undeniable, finally begins. What makes this idea so powerful is that it doesn't ask you to fight your environment every day. It asks you to stop letting your environment decide for you. Most people don't realize how often their attention is negotiated away in small moments. When they agree to one more meeting that doesn't need them. When they respond immediately just because they can. When they allow urgency to disguise itself as importance. The book makes it clear that none of these moments are dramatic on their own, but together they quietly shape the direction of your life. Not through big decisions, but through daily defaults. One of the most eye-opening points the book makes is that progress is rarely blocked by lack of effort. It's blocked by diffusion. Energy scattered across too many directions loses its power. Imagine trying to water a field with a hose that's leaking everywhere. No matter how long you stand there, nothing grows properly. The book argues that your attention works the same way. When it's split, diluted, and constantly redirected, even the best intentions struggle to produce meaningful results. But when that same energy is channeled toward fewer, clearer priorities, progress becomes almost inevitable. This is why the author stresses the importance of deciding in advance, not in the middle of the day, not when pressure is high, but before the noise starts. When you define what matters ahead of time, distractions stop being temptations and start being decisions you've already made. You're no longer constantly asking yourself what to do next because the answer is already there. That mental relief alone creates space to think clearly, to work deeply, and to move with purpose instead of urgency. Another subtle but important idea in the book is that focus isn't about isolation. It's about alignment. You don't have to eliminate everything else from your life to give your attention to what matters. You just have to stop letting low-value demands interrupt high-value moments. The author explains that when your priorities are clear, you can still handle the necessary tasks of life without letting them take over. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of comply. And over time, people around you adjust, not because you explained yourself, but because your actions became consistent. What often surprises people is how much lighter life feels once this shift happens. There's less second-guessing, less mental back and forth, less guilt about what you're not doing because you're finally confident about what you are doing. The book points out that clarity removes friction. When you know what matters, saying no doesn't feel like rejection, it feels like alignment. And saying yes feels intentional instead of automatic. The deeper message running through the book is that your attention is not just a tool for productivity, it's the foundation of your life experience. What you consistently pay attention to becomes your reality. If your days are filled with interruptions and minor obligations, your life will feel fragmented. If your days are built around meaningful priorities, your life begins to feel coherent. Not perfect, not easy, but intentional. Toward the end, the book gently reminds you that this isn't about becoming rigid or extreme. It's about becoming honest. Honest about your limits. Honest about your energy. Honest about what truly deserves your best effort. When you stop pretending you can give everything equal attention, you start giving the right things the attention they deserve. And that brings us back to where we started. That moment when you sit down with good intentions, ready to make progress. The difference now is that you're no longer relying on willpower or mood. You've already decided what matters. You've already made space for it. And when distractions show up, as they always will, they no longer pull you off course. They simply remind you that you're choosing something better. Because in the end, focus isn't about forcing yourself to concentrate. It's about respecting your time enough to protect it. It's about realizing that the direction of your life isn't shaped by the things you occasionally do, but by what you consistently prioritize. And once you start focusing on what truly matters, everything else finally finds its proper place. And here's the part most people don't expect. Once you start protecting what matters, you don't just change how you work, you change how you think. Your mind stops racing ahead to everything that could be done and starts settling into what should be done. That constant low-level stress, the feeling of being behind without knowing why, begins to fade. Not because life slows down, but because your internal compass finally points in a clear direction. The book makes an important distinction here. Being available is not the same as being effective. Just because you can respond, attend, or engage doesn't mean you should. Availability is easy. Effectiveness requires intention. When you understand this, you stop confusing responsiveness with value. You realize that some of the most meaningful progress happens quietly, without notifications, without applause, and often without immediate feedback. Over time, this shift creates a kind of momentum that doesn't rely on pressure. You begin to trust your choices. You stop constantly recalculating your day, and that trust compounds. When you know you're giving your best energy to the right things, distractions lose their emotional pull. They're still there, but they no longer feel urgent. They no longer feel personal. They're just options you're choosing not to take. The book also challenges the idea that clarity is something you find. Clarity is something you build, decision by decision. It's created when you repeatedly choose alignment over convenience. And the more often you do that, the easier it becomes. What once felt like discipline starts to feel like identity. You're no longer trying to stay focused. You're simply acting in line with what you've already decided matters. There's a quiet confidence that comes from this way of living. You stop measuring yourself against everyone else's pace. You stop feeling guilty for not doing more because you're finally doing what's right for you. The book reminds you that comparison thrives in confusion, but clarity makes it irrelevant. When your priorities are clear, other people's choices stop distracting you from your own. And maybe the most important realization of all is this: your attention is shaping your future in real time, not someday, not when things calm down, right now. Every moment you give your energy to something that doesn't matter is a moment taken from something that does. That's not meant to scare you, it's meant to empower you. Because it means change doesn't require a dramatic overhaul. It starts with a single, intentional decision. So when you think about the days ahead, don't ask how full they'll be. Ask how aligned they'll be. Don't aim to do more. Aim to do what matters consistently, deliberately, and without apology. Because focus isn't about narrowing your life. It's about giving your life a direction. And once you have that direction, you don't need to chase progress anymore. You simply walk toward it. And as you keep walking in that direction, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You stop feeling like you're constantly catching up to your own life. That sense of always being one step behind, one email late, one task overdue, one goal postponed, starts to loosen its grip. Not because everything is suddenly under control, but because control was never the point. Direction was. The book makes it clear that when your direction is steady, imperfection stops feeling like failure and starts feeling like part of the process. You also begin to notice how much of your energy used to disappear into things that didn't really ask for your best thinking, only your availability. Quick decisions, quick replies, quick fixes, the kind of work that fills time but rarely leaves a mark. Once you start focusing on what matters, that kind of activity becomes easier to recognize for what it is. Not wrong, just secondary. And when something is truly secondary, it no longer deserves to dominate your best hours. The book emphasizes that this shift isn't about isolating yourself from the world or becoming unreachable. It's about choosing when and how you engage. When your priorities are clear, you can be present without being pulled apart. You can contribute without being consumed. And that balance changes how you experience your days. You're no longer switching constantly between roles, expectations, and demands. You're moving with intention, even when the day itself is unpredictable. Another insight the book offers is that focus grows stronger through consistency, not intensity. You don't need dramatic bursts of effort to make progress. You need repeated alignment. Showing up again and again for the things that matter, even when it feels ordinary, even when the results aren't immediate, is what creates momentum. Over time, those small, aligned actions begin to stack up. And one day, you realize you're standing somewhere new, even though nothing about the process felt extreme. This is where many people experience a quiet shift in confidence. Not the loud kind that comes from external validation, but the steady kind that comes from keeping promises to yourself. When you repeatedly choose what matters over what's merely convenient, you build trust with your own judgment. And that trust makes future decisions easier. You stop overthinking. You stop hesitating. You move forward with a calm certainty that wasn't there before. The book also touches on something rarely talked about: how focus affects your sense of meaning. When your attention is scattered, life can feel fragmented, even when things are going well. But when your attention is aligned, even simple days feel grounded. You're no longer just reacting to what happens. You're participating in something you've chosen. And that choice, repeated daily, creates a sense of purpose that doesn't depend on constant excitement or external approval. As this way of living takes hold, you start to notice that time feels different. Days don't necessarily feel longer, but they feel fuller, more complete. You remember what you worked on. You remember why it mattered. And that memory creates satisfaction that no amount of busyness ever could. The book doesn't frame this as a productivity win. It frames it as a life win. Because at the end of the day, what matters isn't how much you handled. It's whether your energy went where it truly belonged. And slowly, almost without realizing it, the loop begins to break. Not through force, not through pressure, but through clarity. The same world is still there. The same demands, the same noise, but you're no longer drifting inside it. You're moving through it with intention, guided by choices you've already made. And that's the quiet promise at the heart of focus on what matters. When you stop letting everything compete for your attention, you finally give yourself the chance to build something meaningful, one deliberate moment at a time. What's important to understand is that this way of living doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in gradually. At first, it shows up as small decisions that feel almost insignificant: choosing not to engage, choosing to delay a response, choosing to stay with one thing a little longer instead of jumping to the next. These moments don't feel heroic. No one notices them. But the book reminds you that these quiet choices are exactly where change takes root. They're proof that you're no longer operating on autopilot. As these choices accumulate, you begin to notice a shift in how you experience pressure. Pressure used to feel like something external, something happening to you. Deadlines, expectations, demands. But once you've defined what matters, pressure becomes contextual. You can tell the difference between pressure that aligns with your priorities and pressure that simply wants your attention. That awareness alone is powerful. It allows you to engage fully when it counts and disengage without guilt when it doesn't. The book also highlights how much emotional energy is wasted on indecision. When you haven't decided what matters, every request becomes a negotiation. Every opportunity becomes a dilemma. You spend more time thinking about what to do than actually doing anything meaningful. But once your priorities are clear, that mental friction disappears. Decisions don't vanish, but they simplify. You're no longer weighing everything equally. You already know what carries weight. There's also a noticeable change in how you end your days. Instead of replaying everything you didn't get to, your mind settles on what you did choose. And that distinction matters. The book explains that satisfaction doesn't come from completion, it comes from alignment. Even unfinished work feels lighter when you know your energy went to the right place. That sense of alignment creates rest that's deeper than sleep, because it quiets the mental noise that usually follows you into the night. Over time, this approach reshapes your relationship with ambition. You stop chasing progress in every direction and start building depth where it counts. Growth becomes intentional instead of scattered. You're no longer measuring success by how much you can handle, but by how deliberately you can move forward. And that kind of progress is sustainable. It doesn't burn you out, it grounds you. The book makes it clear that this isn't about becoming rigid or inflexible. Life will still interrupt you. Unexpected things will still demand your attention. The difference is that interruptions no longer redefine your priorities. They're handled, then released. Your direction remains intact. You return to what matters instead of losing yourself in everything else. And eventually, you reach a point where focus stops feeling like something you're trying to maintain. It becomes something you return to naturally, like a habit, like a baseline. You don't have to force it because it's rooted in decisions you've already made. Decisions about what deserves your time, your energy, and your best thinking. That's the deeper lesson running through focus on what matters. Your life doesn't become meaningful through intensity or constant effort. It becomes meaningful through clarity, through choosing fewer things and choosing them well, through understanding that attention is not infinite, and that where you place it determines not just what you accomplish, but how you experience your life while you're doing it. And once that understanding settles in, you stop asking how to manage your time better. You start asking how to live it better.